Racist store clerk refuses to serve black customer, then learns he's the new owner. It was a typical cold Black Friday evening. Shoppers bustled about downtown, eager to snag discounted items before the stores closed for the night. Among them was Arthur, a tall, dignified black man in his early 50s. Arthur carried himself with a calm assurance, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed back, and his demeanor reflecting years of experience and patience. He wasn't one to rush. He preferred to observe the world with a steady, thoughtful gaze. Arthur entered the large supermarket, a place he hadn't visited in years. He strolled down the aisles with unhurried purpose, greeting other shoppers with polite nods. Some returned his gestures with smiles, while others barely acknowledged his presence. He noticed an elderly woman struggling with her basket and approached her. "Ma'am, would you like some help with that?" he offered kindly. The woman smiled but shook her head. "Oh, thank you, dear. I've got it." He chuckled softly. "All right then, you take care." Continuing his shopping, Arthur selected a few items: sugar-free cookies, a gallon of milk, butter, and a loaf of bread. He kept his pace deliberate, observing the store's lively, if slightly chaotic, atmosphere. At the checkout, the lines were predictably long, and the store's employees were scrambling to keep up with the holiday rush. Arthur's eyes briefly met those of a young mother struggling to calm her crying toddler, and he offered her a sympathetic nod. After about half an hour, it was finally Arthur's turn at the register. He moved forward, placing his items on the counter as the store manager, Chuck, a middle-aged white man with a sharp, impatient expression, loomed nearby. Chuck's eyes darted around, barking instructions at employees while occasionally glancing over the checkout process. Arthur noticed that the loaf of bread he picked up was nearing its expiration date. With a polite tone, he addressed Chuck. "Excuse me, sir. I believe this loaf of bread is almost expired. Could I possibly get a fresher one?" Chuck's gaze flickered to Arthur for a brief moment, taking in his composed demeanor before his eyes narrowed slightly. He hesitated just long enough to be noticeable, then dismissed Arthur with a curt wave of his hand. "I'm quite busy at the moment. If you have a problem, you'll need to speak with someone else." Arthur, though taken aback by the dismissive tone, maintained his calm. "I just need a quick exchange, sir. It's really just a matter of a few minutes." Chuck's face tightened, the irritation in his eyes sharpening. He glanced around, seemingly more concerned with the busy store than with Arthur's request. "I'm handling several things at once here. I suggest you take it up with one of the cashiers." Arthur's gaze remained steady. "I'm sure it won't take long. I'd appreciate it if you could assist me." As Chuck's irritation flared, a subtle shift in his posture revealed his discomfort. His usually sharp movements grew more hesitant, and he struggled to maintain his earlier facade of control. Unbeknownst to him, his impatience and dismissiveness were beginning to draw the attention of other shoppers who were starting to take note of his behavior. The store buzzed with the frenetic energy of Black Friday shoppers. Arthur stood calmly at the counter, his gaze unwavering as Chuck, the manager, bristled with irritation. Nearby customers began to shift their attention toward the escalating scene. The young cashier, who had been scanning Arthur's items with a growing sense of unease, glanced nervously between the two men. Arthur's voice was steady and polite. "I believe this loaf of bread is nearly expired. Could I please get a fresher one?" Chuck's eyes barely flickered toward Arthur, his irritation barely masked. "Yeah, well, I'm a bit busy right now," he replied gruffly, his hands fidgeting with the register as he tried to maintain a facade of control. "If it's such a problem, maybe you should shop somewhere else." Arthur, taken aback by the hostility, raised an eyebrow. "I'm sure it won't take much of your time. I'm just asking for a replacement." Chuck's posture became more rigid, and he avoided making direct eye contact. "We've got real customers to deal with today. Go find what you need, or leave." Arthur's expression hardened slightly, but his tone remained calm. "Real customers," he echoed softly. "Are you implying I'm not one of them?" Chuck's jaw tightened as he shifted his stance, crossing his arms defensively. "I'm saying I've got more important things to handle than whatever complaints you might have. This is Black Friday, after all." Arthur's gaze didn't waver. It's about basic decency, Chuck. I'm not asking for special treatment, just respect and service. Chuck's eyes narrowed, and he scoffed, rolling his eyes. Oh, I see how it is. You think you're entitled to special treatment. That's the problem with your kind, always making a fuss. Arthur's calm was tested, but he didn't back down. My kind? All I asked for was fresh bread. It seems there's more at play here than just a simple request. Nearby shoppers began to murmur, their discomfort evident. A woman in line leaned over to her friend and whispered, "He's always like this, so rude to anyone he doesn't like." Chuck's face flushed with anger as he stepped closer to Arthur, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate. "You think you can come in here and lecture me about respect? In my store?" Arthur stood his ground, his posture unflinching. "I'm not lecturing. I'm asking for proper service." Chuck's anger boiled over, and he snapped, "You people always play the race card. Every time something doesn't go your way, it's racism this and discrimination that. Maybe if you just act like a normal customer, I wouldn't have to deal with this." Arthur's eyes narrowed. "This isn't about playing a card. It's about respect, something you clearly lack." Chuck laughed harshly. "Respect? You want respect? You're the one causing a scene here, not me." Arthur's patience was fraying, but he maintained his composure. "I'm causing a scene. You've turned a simple request into a conflict. You insulted me, and now you're trying to shift the blame." The tension in the store was palpable. A young man with headphones around his neck muttered, "This is messed up. That guy's just trying to buy bread." Chuck, oblivious to the growing unrest, remained focused on his own anger. "I don't need to explain myself to you. I don't owe you anything." Arthur shook his head slowly. "You don't owe me anything personally. But as a store manager, you owe it to your customers to treat them with respect. Regardless of your prejudices, I'm here as a paying customer." Chuck's face reddened with rage. "Get out of my store, now." Arthur stood firm. "Your store?" He chuckled softly, the sound devoid of humor. "I think you're mistaken." The store's atmosphere grew heavier as shoppers focused entirely on the confrontation. Chuck's frustration was evident, his fists clenched, while Arthur remained composed. "I'll say it one more time," Chuck growled, his voice trembling with fury. "Get out." Arthur's gaze was steady, almost pitying. "And if I don't, what will you do? Call security? Have me arrested for asking for fresh bread?" Chuck seemed to falter, his anger momentarily eclipsed by uncertainty. Before he could respond, the store's door swung open and a group of men in suits entered. The leader, a tall, well-dressed man with a clipboard, called out in a commanding voice, "Excuse me, is the manager here?" Chuck, eager to regain his composure, puffed out his chest and stepped forward. "Yeah, that's me. What do you need?" The man with the clipboard gave Chuck a quick, appraising look before turning his attention to Arthur. Recognition flashed across his face, and his stern expression softened. Before Arthur could respond to Chuck's latest tirade, the store's door swung open, admitting a small group of men in sharp suits. Their formal appearance contrasted starkly with the chaos of Black Friday. One of them, a tall man with a clipboard, stepped forward and addressed Chuck with a stiff but polite smile. "Excuse me, are you the store manager?" Chuck, still fuming from his confrontation with Arthur, barely glanced at the newcomer. "Yeah, that's me. What do you want? Can't you see we're in the middle of something?" The man with the clipboard raised an eyebrow at Chuck's dismissive tone, but remained professional. "We're from the audit committee. We're here to conduct our final assessment. This store was recently sold to our client, Mr. Robert, and we need to finalize the transition paperwork." The color drained from Chuck's face, his posture visibly faltering. "S sold." He stammered, his eyes darting between the audit team and Arthur. "What do you mean sold?" Arthur, who had been standing by the register with a calm demeanor, caught the man's eye and offered a small, knowing smile. Chuck's confusion deepened, his jaw slackening as if grappling with the sudden shift in reality. The man with the clipboard's brow furrowed slightly, trying to gauge Chuck's sincerity. "Yes, sold. As of last week, this store is now under the ownership of Mr. Robert." He then turned his gaze to Arthur, his tone softening. "Ah, Mr. Robert, what a pleasant surprise. We weren't expecting you here today." The room fell silent, the kind of silence that makes every breath feel like a loud echo. All eyes turned to Arthur, who had not yet spoken but now stood at the center of attention. Chuck's face twisted between a pale, ghostly shade and flushed embarrassment as he alternated his gaze between Arthur and the audit team. Arthur maintained his composure, his voice casual as he addressed the room. "I thought I'd come down and check on things. Make sure everything's in order." The audit team member smiled and flipped through the papers on his clipboard. "Absolutely, sir. We're just here to wrap up the final details. After that, the store will officially be yours." Chuck looked as if he had swallowed a lemon. Wait a second," he sputtered, his voice growing thin and shaky. You're saying he owns the store now?" He pointed at Arthur, as if the very idea was a cruel joke. Arthur raised an eyebrow, a faint, ironic smile playing on his lips. "That's exactly what they're saying." I wasn't informed." Chuck blurted out, his hands waving in a wild, frantic manner. "Nobody told me anything about this. There must be some mistake." "There's no mistake," the man with the clipboard assured him calmly. "The sale was finalized last week. The paperwork's all in order." Chuck's eyes darted around the room, panic creeping into his voice. I need to make a call. This can't be happening." Arthur watched him with a hint of satisfaction, clearly enjoying the turn of events. "No need for calls," Arthur said, his voice casual yet firm. "You'll get the details soon enough. For now, why don't we let these gentlemen finish what they came to do?" Chuck opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again, like a fish out of water. But the audit team member cut him off with a curt nod. "Sir, if you could just sign here to acknowledge the transfer, we'll be out of your hair in no time." Chuck stood there, frozen, unable to process that the man he had been so dismissive of moments ago was now his boss. The reality of the situation was settling in, and it was clear Chuck's world had just been turned upside down. Here's an expanded version with more conflict, including Chuck's plea for a second chance and Arthur's internal struggle about whether to fire him. Arthur considered the plea, weighing the options. He knew that allowing Chuck to stay could mean risking continued poor treatment of customers, but he also knew that outright firing him could leave a gap in the store's management that would need to be filled. The audit team member approached Arthur, his expression neutral but attentive. "Sir, if you're ready, we can complete the transfer paperwork. We'll need to discuss any staffing decisions afterward." Arthur nodded, acknowledging the need to move forward. He looked back at Chuck, who was practically holding his breath. "For now, the audit team will finish their work. After that, we'll discuss your future here, if there even is one." Chuck's face fell, but he nodded, a mixture of resignation and hope in his eyes. "I understand. I'll be waiting." As the audit team resumed their work, the store fell into a heavy silence once again. The customers, having witnessed enough, began to disperse, their murmurs and expressions reflecting a range of emotions. Arthur remained poised, his mind working through the implications of his decision. He knew that this was more than just about Chuck's behavior. It was about setting a standard for how customers should be treated and what kind of leadership he wanted to embody. It was a decision that required not only justice, but also a measured approach to change. Arthur's gaze lingered on Chuck for a moment longer before he turned his attention to the audit team. The weight of the decision hung in the air, a reminder that leadership often involved balancing fairness with the necessity for accountability. The store's atmosphere remained tense as the audit team completed their tasks, and Arthur's thoughts were heavy with the responsibility of ensuring that his actions would lead to a better future for everyone involved. The focus on Chuck's closure and Arthur's leadership, or consequences. The tension in the store was palpable as Arthur addressed the crowd, his voice steady and commanding. "I've always believed that people can change," he said, his gaze fixed on Chuck. "But change requires acknowledgement, and it's clear you don't fully understand the weight of your actions." Chuck's face was a canvas of emotions, fear, embarrassment, and a dawning realization of his precarious position. His shoulders sagged as he looked around, desperate for some form of support. The The customers who had witnessed the scene were resolute in their stance, their discontent obvious. Arthur continued, his tone unyielding. I could forgive you, but it's not just my decision. This store is part of a community, and the people here deserve to feel safe and respected when they shop. They've seen your behavior, and they should have a say in what happens next. A murmur of agreement rippled through the store. A woman with a grocery cart spoke up, her voice firm. If he stays, I won't come back here. Another shopper, an older man with a lined face, added, I won't support a place that tolerates this kind of treatment. It's not just about one person. It's about the values this store represents. Chuck's face drained of color. The realization that his job, and perhaps his entire career, was on the line was sinking in. He turned to Arthur, desperation in his eyes. Please, Mr. Robert, I didn't mean to cause all this trouble. I'll do anything to make it right. Just give me a chance to prove I can change. Arthur sighed, his expression softening slightly but still firm. Change doesn't happen overnight, and I don't believe you've got it in you. But I want you to understand the gravity of this situation. You've lost the trust of the community, and that's not something easily rebuilt. The store fell into a heavy silence as Arthur turned to the customers. If anyone has anything else to add, now's the time. The room remained silent, the collective sentiment clear. Arthur nodded and then faced Chuck. The people have spoken, and their voices carry weight. For now, you're relieved of your duties. We'll handle the necessary steps to finalize your departure. Chuck's shoulders slumped further as he turned to leave. He took one last look around the store, his face a mask of regret and resignation. The words of the customers and Arthur's unwavering stance echoed in his mind. As he walked out, he muttered under his breath, I'll get it right. I promise. Arthur watched him go, a mix of satisfaction and sadness in his expression. It was clear that Chuck's departure was necessary, but the weight of the decision was not lost on him. The next few days saw a flurry of activity in the store. Arthur was determined to set things right and ensure that the store reflected his values. He implemented new policies aimed at improving customer service and promoting inclusivity. Posters emphasizing respect and zero tolerance for discrimination were prominently displayed. Arthur also initiated one-on-one meetings with the remaining staff, discussing the importance of creating a welcoming environment for everyone. One morning, as Arthur was reviewing the new employee handbook, the store's door swung open and Chuck walked in. He looked more composed, though the weariness in his eyes was evident. Arthur looked up, surprised but composed. Chuck, Arthur said, setting aside the handbook. What brings you back? Chuck took a deep breath. I came to apologize. Not just to you, but to everyone I've wronged. I've had some time to think, and I realize I need to make amends. I've been reflecting on my actions and the harm they've caused. Arthur studied him for a moment, weighing his words carefully. Apologies are a start, but it's your actions moving forward that will define your change. Chuck nodded. I understand. I started volunteering with organizations that work on racial equality and inclusion. It's a long road, but I'm committed to learning and growing. Arthur nodded, acknowledging Chuck's effort. That's a positive step. It's a long road, but I hope you continue on it. For now, I wish you well. I hope you find the redemption you seek. Chuck nodded gratefully. Thank you, Mr. Robert. I won't waste this opportunity. As Chuck left the store once more, Arthur felt a sense of closure. He had made difficult decisions and faced the challenges of leadership, but he knew he had taken the right steps to ensure the store was a place of respect and dignity for all. Arthur turned back to the store, a renewed sense of purpose in his heart. His journey was just beginning, but he was determined to lead with integrity and create a space where every customer felt valued and heard.